So how are you finding retirement?
I find it a bit odd because
Yeah.
you do become institutionalised over 30 years, and I think being tied to a pager, being constantly available, so many methods of contacting you nowadays that it's a bit strange when they start to fall away, and they fall away incrementally, and eventually nobody's contacting you. And it's only been a couple of weeks, so it does feel a bit strange.
You were saying before we started recording with you, good lady, like you were, going to bed one evening and you're like, "Where's my pager?" Like it's a lifeline because you have a responsibility, you have this weight on your shoulders. But I'm on leave, but I'm never on leave. Really help people understand a little bit because myself included. I mean, I've had lots of chats with senior leaders, but it's still a really rough thing to get your mind around. You're never really not available, are you?
No, I mean you'd find it really difficult. I think if you're the chief, you're going to get contacted, irrespective of who else is maybe the lead duty principal officer for the evening, because they want you to know. They want to inform you about it. They want to give you the opportunity to engage with an issue. And for the last 4 years, I've been the vice chair of National Fire Chiefs Council, and so that pretty much means anything that kicks off anywhere nationally, you're going to get invited into it. If there's an event, I remember the explosion in Jersey
Mm.
last year. Sunday afternoon, out walking the dog, and your phone goes, "We're going to have a Teams meeting in the next hour." You don't have to join it, but you will, you
Yeah.
know, and
There's
and
a
and you're
balance of
instantly involved.
professional courtesy, isn't there? And also feeling like an obligation slash. But I remember reading something, I was reading an article the other day, and there was a quote in there that just hit me like a brick. And it was like, if it costs you your peace of mind, the price is too high. And I'm like, yes, I get that. But it's hard to apply that to a context where I think the problem with emergency services as a whole, I won't narrow it down too much to firefighting, although I wonder if firefighting's worse. We're very romantic about it. It's very much a vocation. And I mean, I know when I say we don't get paid for it, yes, I know principal officers get paid a lot, but it's also relative to their responsibility. And also, by comparison to external organisations, they get paid very little. Hence why some people aren't applying for these senior leadership positions now because they're not. You could find yourself quite literally, and many people have seen it, on the front page of something. Why has this happened? What didn't you do about it? You knew about it. Da 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 da. But how did you and your family and your loved ones and everybody like? I mean, I suppose it happened so progressively that maybe it wasn't even a conversation, but like stepping into those next realms of leadership. How much of a conscious decision was it around how much of your personal time, and it's not just your time, it's everybody's time, your children, your spouse, your significant other. You're making a sacrifice on behalf of a lot of people, really, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. I mean, I did a master's degree in 2006. One of the things I was looking at it was the sustainability of strategic leadership. And
Okay.
you look around and you look at churn and you look at the challenges that people are under, and you look at the tenures of people, and you think, well, actually, if you want to be progressing through the ranks, and you want to move to, you really need to understand what it is that you want out of it, what it is that you're trying to achieve, because it can't just be, the next pay increase, or the next level of
Hmm.
status or something like that that you might perceive it to be, because you need to understand as much as you can the impact of it. But I pretty much concluded that this isn't something you can jump into too early if you want to have a long career and retire at the end of it.
Mm.
And then oddly, I went and did the opposite. So over a 30-year career, I spent 15 years, half of it as a principal officer, and then the other
Wow.
15 years doing every other rank. So it's a long time spent in that position that I pretty much concluded that's not particularly sustainable. And in truth, Pete, it's not. You make sacrifices along the way. You don't give the time and energy that you should do to other parts of your life or to loved ones that you want to. And you do go through significant periods of pressure and strain. And it's probably fair to say that I was right in a way, that it isn't sustainable without there being a cost. And there is a cost, undoubtedly. I think there's a cost, and everybody handled it in different ways. And when I first started out, we probably weren't really talking about resilience and well-being, and having cultivated networks of support and things like that we talk about now. And I do a lot of in support of other people because of those battle scars, I suppose, those experiences that you have along the way that can impact you quite deeply, and you can end up with like negative coping strategies and stuff like that. So, it's you've got to know what you want from it. And for me, I never set out to be a chief. I did set out to make sure I could be in the right environments to have the influence I wanted to have, and that's incremental. So I think when you're on a watch and you look at the way things are operating more globally in your organisation, there's a level of influence you can have, and your organisation should be interested in your opinions and your views and your ideas. But if you really want to be having the influence, you need to be part of the change that you want to see. And so for me, each time you got to a level that in there, you'd say, well, I need to be in that environment if I want to have this level of influence, or if I want to understand it better. I need to be in it. And so for me, eventually that ended up you regularly in meetings nationally with, government, Home Office, ministers, different departments, national employers. And then you sort of see how that works and how you can effectively influence in that environment so you get the outcomes that you want for the people that you look after and serve, your workforce.
So I really discipline myself not to interrupt there. I'm terrible at interrupting, as people will know listening to it. There's a few threads I want to tease from what you've just said. There's an element around knowing you're climbing the right ladder, but you won't know it until you start climbing it is sort of the thing. Like you say you want to, not you, but like if people want to make a difference, they want to be able to have an impact. Or if, like you alluded to, if people want to do it for financial reward or social recognition and adulation, knowing if you're going to get that from the thing, but also there's a sunk cost fallacy. Have you ever related with this when you've spent so much time in something? So the study relates to gambling as a simple example. Long-term relationships can be another. Professions can be another. I've spent 10 years doing the thing now. I've said this is everything I want, and now I'm inside the room and I'm in the conversation and I realise it's maybe not the thing I wanted. Like, delve a little bit deeper for me on the motivations behind, because you've done a lot of coaching, mentoring, advising with other people looking for various level of promotions. How do you help them sort of delve into their why a little bit more? And that might sound very Simon Sinek whimsical for some of the listeners, but like I think it's important because, like, as an example for me, I'd certainly had aspirations at one point in time, and maybe they still lie dormant to being some sort of senior leader in some capacity in the fire and rescue service. Not to say that I never will. But really wanted to do is I wanted to make a difference, again, as whimsical as that sounds, and feel the response from it. And maybe sadly by accident, I've kind of stumbled into this thing, the podcasting thing, and we get a lot of awesome, lovely, heartfelt emails and messages and whatever. This might be the thing I end up doing, and that will be okay, I think. Well, I love it, so it's great. Obviously, everyone doesn't love it, but I give it as an example as simply by I get a lot of fulfillment from this, and maybe just neurologically, like, so I don't think I've got the right bits to go up there and do that. Certainly not at this stage in my life. So that's a long waffle of my own personal example, but like help me understand when you've had conversations with people that say, Justin, I'm going for my group managers. I'm going for the, I've got my
Mm.
SLT thingy, Bob, and I really want to, why do they, what is the reason they say that they want to do it? Because yours happened so fast. Maybe it was, I don't know if you had pause for thought.
I think I really try and understand the why. So, what's driving someone around it? I mean, I use do quite an interesting exercise of values cards myself, and it's almost self-conscious. You've got to flick through them, keep moving through them, and to identify what it is that you um, hold dear around different parts of your life. So, what do you want out of a career? What do you want out of your personal life that's away from that? What do you want for your family in the future? And what are the principal things that's driving that? And as you go through values cards, and you have hundreds of them in a stack, and you start to put them in these different piles, and some of them start to repeat, which probably means um, you hold that even more strongly, and you start to go through this exercise, because sometimes the things we think are driving us, the things we communicate with other people, where we say, "Oh, well, I'm doing this for my family," and you think, well, if you were entirely doing it for your family, you probably wouldn't be neglecting them or being uh, stressed when you're around them and stuff like that. So there might be other things that are driving you that you haven't properly recognised. And I'd quite often see it with people that want to make the jump from area manager to principal officer, and it's there are a few big jumps you make in the fire and rescue
For
service.
people that are very certainly in the infancy of their career, just expand for us the different, because I'm obviously not at either of those roles. Expand the differences in responsibility, maybe in pay and significance. I mean, they're all significant roles, but just
Yeah,
help us all understand the difference there.
for sure. And if you look at the role maps, it's the first level of becoming strategic and shaping the future of the organisation comes in at area manager level, but only in a relatively small way. In many ways, an area manager is the chief implementer of change. They are the people that will be putting things in place that come from the vision and the strategies, and they'll be charged with doing that. And it's a really busy role. It's got a lot of things to keep on top of, and process and project manage, and doing all the other things that's involved in being a leader at that level. But they probably get less opportunity to start to define, where it is the organisation is going to be going over the next, 3, 5, 7, 10 years.
They're on the
That comes in
outskirts of those
more,
conversations. Yeah.
and sometimes it's a bit of a barrier for people. Their ability to be able to do something really well doesn't necessarily predict their ability to be able to do something different equally as well. And you put in things to identify people with potential, and you put in things to give people support, and hopefully when they take up their roles, scaffolding around them to enable them to be successful. Because we can end up in an environment where people are waiting to see whether people
Mm.
prove themselves, which I think is
Yeah.
awful, because actually there's a duty to try and help people to be as successful as they can be, especially when we all go through, at least I think we all go through, at least the first 6 months in a new role of having imposter syndrome and thinking, what if I'm not genuinely up?
You mentioned something there around imposter syndrome. That's a term that's commonly thrown around, so I don't want to skip over it because sometimes people think we're, just using buzzword bingo. When does that ever stop being a thing? Because ultimately, for me, like with the podcasting thing as another example, eventually you just paint enough layers of evidence that you are who you say you are. And I always say to people, like, you can't pickpocket a naked person. Like, I've no secrets. We've shared a great deal of things. Most stuff I've probably said on here at some point in time. Why do people still get held up around that, especially in a role like firefighting, where for most people that have reached a level like that, they'll have already been to thousands of jobs. They've been in the sector for at least a decade, usually by the time they get into this point. Why do you think that's still so prevalent? And also, I'd maybe add a layer of question there around how we are expediting development these days because we're hemorrhaging experience. You're another example of someone with colossal amount of experience, which are leaving the sector in droves for a variety of reasons. that imposter syndrome has the potential to become paralyzing for some people who are encouraged, moved into these roles at quite a rapid rate.
I think I can only speak from my own experience of it, because everybody's going to be different about how they feel about going into new roles. But you're always, unless you've been doing it, say, temporary for a long period of time or something, it's much more likely that you're going to be going into a new environment. So, yes, you know yourself, yes, you know what you're capable of, but you're in a different environment now, and there's maybe different level of expectation around you, and people looking more closely at your performance, and maybe a workforce that's looking to say, what's this person and how do
Yeah.
they operate? And I think it's natural for you to say, be a little bit self-questioning and having self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a natural part of the process that evidence that you gather of operating in role starts to give you that little bit more confidence. But moving to the second part of your question, what can an organisation do to get that right, is to recognise that that happens. And therefore, people need a bit of support. They need to be allocated a coach, a mentor. They need to be given, I suppose, the leniency that you need in the first 6 months. I think people sometimes in the first 6 months put themselves under the most pressure because they feel like they need to be seen to be performing at a perfect level to prove that they were the right appointment or whatever it may be. So I think that organisational cultural awareness and people development stuff I think is important.
What
But
about the argument of
with
preparedness? I see it a
sorry.
lot, sorry, with obviously around my level at sort of sub officer, watch manager, progress into rider station officer, station managers, that sort of stuff. I get average amount of encouragement, sometimes a high level of encouragement to move into that next role, which for me would be a station manager. I see a lot of them very stressed, very on the surface, seem very overwhelmed, and I would maybe seem quite unhappy. A lot of them from different services I speak to, different brigades and organisations. There wasn't a massive amount of development or preparedness for them prior to getting to that role. They'll have done their level 2 incident command because they needed it to get on the rota. But I think a lot of them feel tremendously out of their depth, and I'm concerned with the fact that we run a lot of skeleton crews. A lot of we know something we're going to get onto. Around 80% of the cost goes into wages, creating fat on the system that allows for shadowing, mentorship, development. Go and spend a day with Justin. Go and spend a week with Justin. I don't know. Go on this really interesting course out of service that is not just about heart. Most courses that we tend to get deployed to, you'll know, is tactical, qualification based. Don't always give us in my personal opinion, is my thoughts, not yours, the sort of teamwork, holistic, soft skills, emotional intelligence skills. I know there's a lot of things practiced to progress, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of ex-retired senior leaders going into coaching roles and all that sort of stuff, which is great. There's a question in amongst there around how are we preparing people for the roles that they're now going to do? Because I always say, like, as a tactical or a strategic manager, you're likely never going to pick up a hose or a branch or a BA set again. Your tools are your words and your soft skills and your ability to build rapport, to paraphrase, to get people on board. All of these, and we don't think we've trained you for that. You might accidentally have the skills, but I think that's more by luck than design. So, I mean, maybe to ask how you've done it in your service, but again, you're not in complete control of everything that you did in the organisation that you worked for. How do you think we're addressing that? Do you think we're doing enough? Do you think it's realistic for us to have these aspirational goals about holistic development? Someone goes, oh, that sounds wonderful, Justin. It's all right for you. You've retired, mate. Yeah. Where's the budget for that? Where's the time? Where's the people? Who's going to do it? HR? Training? Training do BA and hose and rope rescue and hazmat and water rescue. They don't do that bit. Who's doing it?
No, and that's your people development strategy, isn't it? So you've got your workforce development strategy that says, what's my supply and demand issues? What skill sets do I need of people to be able to do the core functions of what I expect of them? And then how are we going to give them the other skills that they need to have authentic conversations, be able to do appraisals effectively, be able to have, deal with challenging issues and do them in a way that are going to hopefully resolve issues at early stages. All of that needs to be fitted in, and you need to work out how you're going to deliver that. And you've got to deliver that across a workforce. In most cases around the country, are going to be some people you've only got for 2 hours a week. That's your on-call staff, and they still need to have those skills. So you've got a bit more luxury when it comes to your whole-time staff because they have
I
more
actually
time
think our
to be
on-call
able to give you.
departments face the biggest challenges, and I think they, to be a good one, and I'm not saying I was a good one, I did on-call for about 10 years as a crew manager, never as a watch manager. But at my station, watch manager had 23 on-call staff, and to build meaningful relationships with them in such a small time frame requires that person, if they're good at it, to have very, very good soft skills, leadership skills, management skills. Honestly, in my personal thoughts, and again, I'm not on-call now, I'm only whole-time, better than a whole-time manager, or different, certainly, because you've got a lot more leeway. I'm with you for 12 hours. I can get it wrong a bit and then recover from it, and we can work through this challenge over a period of time. I think the on-call, and again, I wonder if it's because they have such varied experiences from a wide range of all the other things they do in their personal life. We don't seem to have as many. I mean, we have problems with recruitment and retention there, but like we train everybody with the hard skills, but the soft skills is what's getting us into hot water all the time when we look at the cultural reviews and stuff like that. No one's telling us off. I mean, take large incidents where we've got Jessup wrong. Okay, we'll take an L on that one. But most of the time, tactically, operationally, readiness, we're very good at the third thing. But we get in trouble and we misstep and hurt people accidentally, I hope, most cases accidentally, and cause them to have shorter careers in those cultural, again, an overused term. But that's where it's a bit like you've recognised you've got a flaw, put more resource into that. But we go, well, I'm just going to do more level 2 incident commandery validations. That's not going to help. That's a very small part. It's an important part of the job, but it's also a very small part of the job now.
Yeah, but it's got to be done. And, you have to look at ways to integrate it into everything you do. So, for example, in my own service, when we put core values in place, and core values can mean nothing, can't they? They can be, words on a document somewhere that's gathering dust on a shelf, or they can be part of how you select people, how you develop people, how you address performance issues, how you manage disciplinaries. They can be integrated and therefore part of the way that you do things rather than a bolt-on. And I think that there's a difference out there. I mean, it's such a complex picture for the fire and rescue service to talk about it holistically.
We will fail, and that's okay, because someone will no doubt go, oh, well, actually, Justin, we do this in Exwoodshire. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, there's going to be, we'll add the caveat now and say, I appreciate this. Some of this may be happening somewhere, but you've got a fairly good finger on the pulse from your life, an NFCC worker. So let's proceed as.
Yeah. Oh, what I would say is it varies. You've got such a spectrum in there. You've got 44 English fire and rescue services that report into the Home Office. You've got 3 Welsh fire and rescue services that report into the Welsh Assembly. You've got 1 Scottish fire and rescue service, the Northern Ireland reporting into Stormont. You've got a UK-wide NFCC that is trying to, and people say, "Oh, NFCC is this and that," and we get into othering. The NFCC is this, the other different parts of the jigsaw or something else, and you think, no, the NFCC. The only thing it really is where we collaborate, where we get together and say, how do we solve some of these problems, appreciating that everybody's somewhere else along the journey about what they need to take from it and how they need to develop. But they're all plugging into different local models of delivery of the fire and rescue service. So you've got combined fire authorities, such as myself. That's quite a tidy model because you control all your own finances.
Explain some of these things, yeah. How does combined fire authorities work for people? Help us understand larger brigades. There's probably only 3 or 4 of them around the UK now, and then local CFA brigades. and how
Yeah.
they get their funding and how it differs.
Okay. Yeah. No problem. And I think this is important because once you understand the complexity of an environment, you can then work out, well, how do I best position myself in that to get the best out of it for people? Where do I spend the right proportion of my time and energy influencing the right people?
This is
And that,
relationship building. It's part of it.
which is it's fascinating stuff to learn, and that's why you have to say, well, I have to cultivate and look after all of the different relationships about this sort of complex and interwoven picture. So, combined fire authorities, very traditional model, standalone fire and rescue service, usually fairly large fire and rescue service. A good example being Lancashire, Kent, and then you'll have seen some models move towards a police, fire and crime commissioner model.
Yeah, what's happened there? Some
So we've
people
got a
think
few
that's a
of
bad
those now,
thing.
and with that, you'll probably end up with more dynamic governance and officers that are part of the office of the police, fire and crime commissioner, whose job it is to be understanding on a daily basis the procurement decisions, the financing options, and having a interest and probably a say so in how things operate, not just over the fire and rescue service, but over the police force and the office of the police, fire and crime commissioner.
Yeah, they try and get everybody moving in the same direction rather than three services or two emergency services, sorry, operating in isolation where the left hand isn't shaking the right hand and we're not making the same efforts into community projects. And ultimately that will result in a lesser outcome for the public because we're not both marching to the beat of the same drum.
If it's all working well.
If it's working
100%.
well.
Yeah, if
My
it's all
big
working well.
concern is
And
if
it
we
all
don't
depends on
sort
those
ourselves
relationships.
out, if we don't sort ourselves out, there's going to be more of them happening. There's a little bit, in my words, not yours, there can be that empire building bit where people are very protective, rightfully so, sometimes over their position, but more than likely over the independence of their organisation as a fire and rescue service as the core purpose of what it does. But if we don't start playing together more, and I know like you could probably speak, well, you will speak far better on what happened with all the tri-service stuff that went on a little while ago, and some worked and some didn't work. Scotland obviously had to voluntarily or were forced to join together because there's a rabbit hole I want to explore there. There's a leadership person I spoke with recently that was talking about these super service, and have you read that person's thing on that thing where they talk about four services getting together predominantly under the guise of solely development. So not sharing finances as such, and you'll tell me, I'm sure you'll be listing off in your brain why this won't work, but if I'm a watch manager in the organizer, and I never say what organisation it is on the podcast, but I work wherever. There's no other watch manager jobs. There's no station manager jobs available where I am because they're like dead man shoes, dead person shoes. So I tell you what if I got seconded to Lancashire for a year, and I was a station manager there for a year, and I got to learn all the extra stuff, all the drone stuff, and all the bigger training department that they have, and all this sort of stuff, and then I bring all of that learning back to my organisation, and we collectively rising tide raises all the ships. Because there's a lot of blockers for people to progress in their organisations. Help me understand both sides of that coin. If you've ever had it proposed to you before, I'm sure it's something you've had many conversations about. And I suppose it comes under the guise of the NFCC's model around collaboration and sharing, learning, and creating opportunities. We don't do lots of comments anymore either, do we? Because we're so few of our staff are available, and you may be able to speak better to that. What's the comments are? We used to have a lot of people going out to the college. We used to have a lot of people seconded to the NFCC, people on full-time FBU contracts. There's a lot less of that going on, for better and worse.
Mm. Let's pick up the secondment bit first then. I mean, I keep saying it like I have. I'm no longer in the fire service.
Yes,
but,
you are. Come on, you're here.
We would probably have about 7 people out typically at any one time on secondments, with the HMI, with National Resilience, with some of the Home Office projects, maybe around moving away from airwave. I've got people out involved in all of those at the moment, and they are great opportunities for development because people get to see central working and they get to see other fire and rescue services, and that compare and contrast that probably in the past we might have got from going to the fire service college. There will be, I'm fairly certain, the establishment of a College of Fire, which will give people opportunities in the future. and that's not the fire service college. It's where you hold your knowledge base. It's where you hold your fire standards. It's where you develop common policy, stuff like that. So there will be opportunities in that once it's up and running, I think, because,
Who's going to pay for that?
well, I'd imagine it's a way of probably redistribution of where some things were already done, and some more, some new money that has to come from central government ultimately.
Government's going to have to pay for it because we
Yeah,
couldn't ask everybody to pay a levy because they just ain't got it in the budgets.
no,
Even if
and
we did it on a percentage based of the size of your organisation, you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I don't think it would work.
no, it's certainly challenging when you start to say, well, we're going to create something new, and if we're going to creating something new that's not realising savings for you, and we're going to take it, therefore top slice it off the top of you, then something else needs to suffer in order for that to happen. So, that's the type of lobbying, if you like, or the conversation I'll be having when I'm in with a Home Office and they're talking about how we achieve something, and it's
Because the argument of professional development isn't a tangible thing I can put a piece of money to. I can't. You go, oh well, you get all this professional development, and I go, yeah, yeah. How much does that cost me? How much are you going to pay me back for this? And you'll go, well, no, there's a fulfillment for your individuals and their personal development, and you'll save a lot of money on wasting time doing your own policies all the time and all this sort of jazz. Ultimately, unfortunately, as a responsibility as a senior leader, the buck stops with you. You cannot go over budget. There's legal ramifications to you not keeping inside the lines.
and so the NFCC delivers a lot of that
Okay.
for us at the moment. That's not just purely in people as a secondment. If you've got somebody working in a training department somewhere that's involved in a working group on how we take something forward, then they'll be feeding into maybe new policies or new fire standards or stuff like that. It's all sort of happening out in our organisations, probably feeding up through regions and international work or directly into national work. And if we're going to remove some of that and set it up in a college of fire, a bit like the police do, then that's going to need some resourcing, and that resourcing is likely to come, I think, in the way that you spoke about, where you'll see more secondment opportunities, a bit like we used to do with the Fire Service College in years gone by, rather than employing
I'd love to see it.
ex-fire
I
service
think it
people.
would give people longer careers. I think it would give them a sense of, I can see a path, whether that's vertical or lateral. I can see that, because I'll be total transparent. Like in my job, I'm not perfect, but I've done most things: operational, non-operational, ops assurance, ops risk, training department, community safety, USAR, ISAR, lots of stations, on call, whole time. I've not done everything, and I'm maybe rubbish at all of it. But I'm like, I get bored. I'm a bit bored. You and I have had private conversations about this a little bit, and I'm like, there's lots I want to do, but don't see a path to doing it because of the limitations of the organisation that I work in. And it's not a bad organisation; it's just the size and agility of it, which is a. So I do think if there were more opportunities, because jumping ship and going, oh, I'm going to leave and go to X whatever, or I'm going to go to this one or that one, or a massive brigade in a big city. Big commitment, easy to go, hard to come back, unless it is a secondment and you see if you like it and you see if they like you. I just think, and again, I know nothing about nothing, but it frustrates me that we don't have more of that already. Or my fear, and again, I don't know, I'm not part of the conversations you're part of, feels like it's becoming less opportunities. But obviously, and even with the elements of direct entry, which has many, many merits to it and is very successful and brings a lot of diversity into the services and our sector as a wider, sort of more holistic. For a lot of people, they go, oh, well, there's loads more barriers. There's loads more jobs I'm not getting. You can see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, certainly numbers-wise, they aren't at the moment. They won't be having any global effect in terms of the small number of direct entry people there are at the
I
moment.
know. They're an
I do
easy
think
target, unfortunately.
there'll be more opportunities, and I can't speak for other fire and rescue services about how they utilise that, because there's a challenge. As a chief, you say, well, how many people can I afford to have out of my organisation who are my middle managers that are that are delivering for me and tend to be very committed, experienced, or professional and knowledgeable people.
I need someone doing the job.
So if my organisation's got, I've got 1,200 to 1,300 people at any one time, including Greenbook staff, and you say, well, where's my ability to be able to release people? But I know that if I release them, they grow. And I know that if I release them, they influence nationally. And, the HMI are always saying, send us your brightest and your best. And you think, well, I can't send you all my brightest and my best because I need my brightest and my best also helping me to deliver the organisation's aims. And so in there's a balance, isn't there? So if you've only got, I don't know, say you come down to an organisation that may have 200 firefighters, although there's a percentage-wise same level of opportunity, volume-wise it's less. But I often find you've got to research what's out there for yourself and you almost push those opportunities because I think people will often see those things as problems rather than solutions or avenues to develop people. And so, I would encourage anybody to be looking outside for those opportunities to say, especially nowadays when a lot of it's going to be working from home. So you're not having necessarily the same family impact or it's going to pull you into a different part of the country. It may do occasionally, and certainly I would always encourage people to do short-term secondments before they took on a 2 or 3 year secondment, because it can be a bit alien jumping outside your organisation into somebody else's. So you get a bit of a try before you buy. Do a short 3-month secondment or something like that. So, but that needs to be part of the development strategy of the organisation. It really does.
Connect some of the dots for us in terms of your progression. Like, what were some of the big gear changes in terms of moving through different levels? Had you always spent time in one organisation, or had you spent time in different organisations? The pros and cons of both, and what were some moments where perhaps you wish you'd given it more consideration, or there's advice you'd have given yourself prior to?
Yeah, there probably would have a couple of times I would have said, don't do it. At that point in your life, and with the amount of stuff that you've already got on, and I would always put on the rose-tinted specs and say that it's all going to be fine. And I definitely sit down, getting back to an earlier question, with area managers now that are looking to, take that big leap maybe off into another organisation, and just make sure that the rose-tinted specs aren't leading them without them understanding the impact that it's going to potentially really have on them and their families. I made a big move from Essex to Cumbria, and knew that it would be a nice place to bring up the children, and it was smashing, and I love the place. It changed my well-being in some ways. It was become part of my lifestyle. Would be about out on the fells and running, and the kids have levels of freedom that they couldn't have where we came from. And a nice place to enjoy your downtime. It's a bit like people talk about work-life balance, and I think work-life balance isn't about having a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that. It's having places that you can go to that restore you, that give you the space or the break. Yeah. And so I went there, and it was fabulous. And a lot of people from a previous service are saying, it's going to be dead quiet, and it wasn't, because I went into a county council setup, and that meant that you were involved in things much more broader than fire as an area manager, and you're part of the county council's change management programs and development structures and issues that they would have, and sizing and going through austerity and all of those things. There was loads to do there. And we also had some of the Northwest's largest incidents as well, bizarrely. We had major scale flooding, stuff that I'd never experienced before. And you find yourself, in a gold command role and things like that. We had the Derick Bird shootings, which is a guy that shot some people that were part of his issues, and then went on randomly killing people down the sort of west coast of Cumbria. And it's a phenomenally strange thing to be dealing with and leading from a fire and rescue service perspective. So it gave me some really interesting experiences, both operationally and professionally. But it also gave me a really good and helpful understanding of the importance of having the right environments, not just for me, but for my family. And then when I was ACO there for a couple of years, the Lancs role came up as DEP. And you know that Lancs is a standalone combined fire authority, fire and rescue service, pretty much in control of its own destiny. It's well regarded, and I had a high regard for it and for its people. And you shoot your shot, and I was lucky. I picked up the role, and I think pretty instantly found the cost of the role was quite high. The amount of time spent travelling, spent away. There's some of the challenges the service was going through at the time that I came into it. Industrial action, having to make changes to fit the operational budget. And as much as people want you to just say no, you can't do it. At the end of the day, if 80% of what you get as a budget goes into paying people's wages, and that budget gets smaller, you're given less to deliver the service, then you've got to find the ways to work that through. So it could be a particularly difficult time there, and if you haven't got things going right in other parts of your life as well, all of a sudden we realise we're just humans as individuals, and things take its costs, and
I would love to, with respect, delve a little bit deeper there, and we can punch the brakes at any point on this conversation. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't explore that a little bit collectively. I'm hopefully coming to the latter end of some challenges in my personal life, divorce-based for me personally, which are different for everybody. Relying a lot on I think resiliency is something we use again as a bit of a buzzword bingo. The worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, so that's where your spectrum begins. I was having a conversation with a senior leader recently I hadn't seen in about 7 months, and he told me he had cancer, and that's why we hadn't been around for a little while. That helps right-size some of your challenges, but ultimately, going back to the worst things that have happened to you is the worst things that have happened to you. And if your own mental fortress, if your own foundations are shaking a little bit, you're kind of starting on rocky ground when we show up for work. I always wonder how much of ourselves, I have this thing about bringing yourself to work day, because I wonder how much of us are actually bringing to work, whether through being fear of being found out, fear of not fitting in, fear of someone realising that my life is a walking bin fire and I'm really struggling just to put my uniform on and walk through the door today. Help me understand, if you could, some of, and obviously with respect to all the people that are in your personal life, we won't go into too much detail, what did you lean on to make it through that moment? Because some people choose a different avenue when they go through some challenges, and perhaps it's something we'll get onto around mental health in a little bit. You in some capacity made it through that difficult time. How did you do that?
But particularly successfully. Not without.
What was your metric of success?
I suppose I'm used to being able to think about something for long enough to solve a problem, and to solve a problem that's going to suit everyone. I think that's what I think I can do, and I'm just not thinking about it hard enough, or with enough different perspectives.
Yeah,
to
I
be
just need
able
more
to
cognitive horsepower. I can solve this. It's fine. Just carry on. We'll be okay.
So I just need to think about it for longer, and I'll find a solution that will work for everybody. And then I suppose you come to a realisation that you can't. And if the other component parts of your life, friendship base, the other things that give you what you need to get through that aren't there in the way that you need it, you can end up in crisis. And I think you can end up problem solving in a different way. and I think that's when I blogged about it at the time. So for me, this is 12, 13 years ago, and it being quite a brave thing to blog about. And I blogged about it carefully, without being too raw about it, because it was something I was dealing with at the time. And I think it was at a time when it wasn't really anywhere near as acceptable as it is now to say, yeah, I'm struggling a bit here. I remember calling our own employee assistance program, and I was a DEP. So, one of the most identifiable people in the organisation, and you just think, I know it's all anonymous, but I'm the DEP and I live in a bit of a goldfish bowl sometimes, or it feels like it at the time. And I left the voicemail because that's what you did back then, and nobody called me back. I was a DEP, so nobody called me back, and no, I think things didn't go all that well, but the bit I'd gone through with planning things in a different way, and being a problem solver there, and then thinking that I may have solved that problem. I worked my way through it mentally, that it wasn't, and I look back on it now, and I can't understand how I rationalised it in my head when I did, but it did. And
We're
I've had.
such good salespeople to ourselves, aren't we? We can convince ourselves of some really surreal things. I think back to my days of addiction and mentally, jujitsu my way through what I was doing was okay and it was justified and it wasn't as bad as real drugs. I'm not injecting heroin here. It's not as bad as so and so. We live in a world of comparison. The only way you can say something's bad is because you have a comparison of good. Right is only there because wrong exists, light and dark, and so on and so forth. We can convince ourselves of some very strange things in the moment.
Yeah, and I think we as problem solvers will say, okay, well, the solution to this problem is, and for some people that can be something that they carry through. And I know you've spoken to Professor Rowena Hill before, and I think there is a bit of an inherent nature in some of us that will say, well, that's a solution, and that's going to be the best for everybody. And it's because you can't see with the clarity that you can when you're not under the pressure. You can understand now how you could find yourself in that position.
Let's tiptoe ever so slightly further, and we will tiptoe here. Who looks after the people who are looking after the people? So there's been examples, far too many, far too recent, of people in senior levels of organisations coming up with fatal solutions to potentially temporary problems, and temporary could be weeks or years, but this too shall pass at some point in time. Making sure that there's an assumption that Justin's an assistant, deputy chief or whatever. He must have really good advisors. He must have a team of people helping him out, supporting him. He's got to have a really good network of coaching, support, whatever it might be. That clearly, in some instances, cannot be the case. And I wrote an article about it recently as well, around the biggest threat facing male firefighters between the ages of 30 and 45 is themselves. And it's worse in emergency services, but that is also an echo of society in general. Why are we getting this so wrong? What are we? Because again, you made it through. So how did you do it? And you're not going to be preaching from upon high with the golden answer to anything here. But is there any strategies, anything? Because sometimes it's easier to connect the dots looking backwards, even if it wasn't a thought through strategy at the time. Did you just cognitively horsepower your way through it? Was work the coping mechanism? It often is for me. How do you think you were able to make it through that? You didn't lose your job, I don't know.
Well, it's temporary in nature, and so some of it is about self-counselling. positive self-talk, making changes that you need to make, even though those changes sometimes are very difficult to do. But you're right. I think particularly back then, there really wasn't anything. And that's why I probably have done so much between, sort of 12, 13 years ago and now, in terms of making sure that, you're sort of checking in with people that you can see are under pressure. Sometimes you can't see the people under pressure. Some people hide it very well, or some people you can check in with them, and they're going to give you everything's fine here. And sometimes you have to be a little bit persistent on that if you're not satisfied. And it is better now, but I think the more senior you become, the more of a target you can become, and the more difficult it can be, because there is only you if you're at the top. Your governance model isn't really doing line management to you and well-being, and
Can't go to the
that type
Combined
of
Fire
thing.
Authority for a one-to-one. I mean, their one-to-one is more of an appraisal of how you've managed your service this last year. It's not and that's not to say they're all heartless people. It's more of a show me the numbers conversation.
Yeah, and you are. There's a level of expectation there. You are the chief, and I think now people are hopefully getting to a point of being much better networked for support reasons nowadays, because of things that have happened, because of experiences that people have had, that they, we're putting it in place for each other, and that's just how it is.
I think that's down to people. You mentioned something earlier and it screamed out to me. Your superpower often lives right next to your scar. Usually, you've experienced something yourself, you see the catastrophic effects of it, and then you become a champion for it. But I said to another guest recently, I don't want having a big injury. I've had a number of big injuries, I've had a number of big losses, business stuff, marital challenges. They're great personal development tools if you make it through them okay-ish. Having a child is a great personal development tool. Gives a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness and empathy and all that sort of jazz, and you become a better communicator in theory. I don't think these are personal development tools we can assign for people. You should go through a really difficult disciplinary and it will make you a better person. Oh, okay, rather not. Can't I just learn a different way? Like I'd love, because eventually those champions and people that have experienced the things of the past, they say the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I'm sure you'll see many instances where you go, that happened about 15 years ago as well. Same thing, pretty much. But that person's gone now. The story was never captured. The lessons were never learned. And I think it was another Churchillian quote where it's like, if we don't learn from our lessons, we're doomed to repeat them. And we are. That's why history rhymes, unfortunately. I want to change gears. I want to go back to flooding for a second, because this is something that's been recent in the news. For people's reference, we're recording in February right now, February of 25. There's been a lot of national work around flooding recently. How far we had lots of conversations with Dawn Whitaker, who is national lead within that sort of, not flooding specifically, but water safety. There's been a lot of progress in that area in the last 10 years. For people that don't know, talk about the fire service's obligations to participate in flooding, what we actually do, maybe reference a bit of the national resiliency model and sort of best practices, and if you think this is a growing risk or if it's just something that's generally seasonal that we're always going to have.
It's definitely a growing risk.
Okay.
I'm 100% on that. I remember coming to Lancashire from Cumbria and Cumbria Floods, and sometimes the problem with Cumbria flooding is the people of the communities in Cumbria go, yeah, we know what happens, we know what to do. And yet the floods come and they're worse than what they've experienced before because of that climate change effect, so more frequent, more severe. So coming to Lancashire, I'd say, well, what do we have in place for flooding? I suppose the answer is not a great deal, because it doesn't really flood here. And yet,
Yep.
within that time frame of just, say, 12, 13 years of being here, we've had many large-scale floods. And what you have to realise, I think, is the equipment that you buy now, you're likely to have for 15 years. The average, a boat, capability, whatever it is. And you're going to need to train your people in a particular way to be more resilient in general, because when you're experiencing it, so are your neighbouring counties, quite likely nowadays. Whether that's wildfires, flooding, anything sort of climate related. And so that gradual move of national resilience assets towards you that just sort of hop over the border aren't going to be coming in the right way. So the planning side of it needs to be different in terms of the build to something, if you can predict it effectively. But the way you respond needs to be planned now, not just for what you're going to be facing right now and you're experiencing now, in a more resilient way than it has been in the past, but it's going to be, you need to be making purchasing decisions for the next 15 years for this climate change stuff that's going to be baked in. So it's baked in for the next 15 years, irrespective of what protocols are met.
Operational readiness for flooding is very expensive, though. Mod 3 courses, all the equipment, the boats, the weight that it places on your training and development department. This is a heavy lift. It's a big thing. How much of an obligation do we have nationally in our role map? Because again, things like fire investigation, we don't have a legal obligation to do. There's things that we do which we feel are our job, and there's things we're actually supposed to do. Like, maybe just help myself and the public understand a little bit around what the fire and rescue service has to do, because sometimes there's a grey area, and different areas, depending on their demographic and their risk profile, will lean more into other things, but it's not necessarily our job.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we look at flooding on its own, because you'll say the same story about road traffic collisions in times gone by.
Yeah.
The world evolves normally quicker than legislation.
Yes.
So either technology moves forward and then we're playing catch up on legislation, or events happen and then there's legislation that follow the events. But in the case of flooding, the services that got to statutory responsibilities for it got some upfront funding. So Scotland and Wales both got statutory responsibility for responding to flooding. That statutory responsibility doesn't say that you need to be able to achieve all things on all occasions all of the time. It just says we recognise you as a service as one of the people that will contribute to the resolution of flooding in your area.
Intentionally vague.
And, if you looked at the UKFRS as a whole and local resilience forums, that's what we've been doing for years. You can trace it back to the floods on Canvey Island in Essex in the 1950s. The Fire and Rescue Service went to it.
We're the eternal problem solvers. We've got very good problem solving staff, and we're going to help because we've got resources and we're pretty good at mackling together solutions.
Yeah, and in days gone by, it probably would have been acceptable to have a small amount of specialist flood response and some guidance and training for everybody else that probably wasn't going to put themselves in too much harm's way. But you change that dynamic and say, well, if you end up with wide-scale flooding, and I'm turning out with people in traditional, bunker pants, firefighting PPE, they may well end up, at least in their boots, in water. And is that right for the new environment and the extension of that environment over the next sort of 15 years? And for me, the answer is no. And so, every firefighter needs to have personal protective equipment for wading. And they need to have training in how the limits of exploitation, about what they can do and what they can't do, and have wading poles and how they operate as part of a broader network of people that are going to provide their safety. So you might
understanding their limitations when it comes to swift moving water and
100%.
all of that jazz.
Yeah, it doesn't enable you to go into.
And the thing is, these things are very dynamic, though, aren't they? They're so dynamic, and the pendulum can swing too far. And this has been a big point of contention around operational discretion, and lots of videos, unfortunately, and photos making their way into the media of watch managers usually stood at the bank saying, why didn't they do anything when the woman drowned in her car? And you're like, yeah, we have let that person down, that watch manager, man or woman. We've let them down because we've put them in a position where their hands are tied procedurally. They're fearing the organizational ramifications of their actions, but they know what they want to do. And Carl Boseman, that works with the podcast, he gives a story of when he was a very young firefighter or crew manager, run back to the truck, BA set on, and they swam down a couple of meters to try and break into this car. They were unsuccessful, nearly cost them their own lives. He doesn't give that story as a big, I'm the big I am. He says that was ridiculous and dangerous and we shouldn't have done it. And but I wonder how much further we've moved. We've educated people a lot, but I still think, as you alluded to, we're catching up in terms of our equipment and training to put our staff in the position where they feel confident to make the right actions, to stop the public taking action themselves. But I don't think we're quite there yet. And I worry all the time when I see these flooding incidents. I'm like, the people are going to do the right thing and get told off for it. But was it the right? It's a hard one, mate. It's a really hard one.
I agree that it's difficult, and I think you could probably have an entire episode on
I know.
what do we mean when
Won't
we
go
talk
too far
about
down this.
operational discretion and making sure that we've got the most up-to-date thinking on it. But the view we had was that you shouldn't be stopped from doing the right thing, because the discretion piece says, well, that was the right thing to do because you objectively justify it. What we should know is that we've ordered on specialist resources, if that's that's the capability that we require. But it wouldn't stop us from taking limits of exploitation, proportionate, reasonable, and we should all be comfortable professionally talking about that afterwards and saying that's why I made those decisions. Now, there's never going to be a perfect environment where you can say, well, let's have a decision tree where somebody doesn't have to apply some professional courage to deciding what the right thing is to do in that situation. And we are, professional people at every level. And as a crew manager and a watch manager and a station manager, we shouldn't be deferring out. And I think that's when we've had problems in the past, and you look at notable cases, we've almost had a decision-making inertia that stops people moving forward in knowing what they think is the right thing to do, that is proportional and reasonable, because they know it's going to infringe a policy somewhere and they're going to be held disproportionately accountable for it. So actually what we want is people feeling confident that if they assess it as they see it, they're not reckless in their decision making, that they've made some form of professional assessment and believe that something is time critical to do something to get the right outcomes, then they should be supported by their organisation in doing so. And that's a hearts and minds thing. And I think we certainly spent a long time making sure that people knew that they would be be backed for doing that.
Backed, protected, supported, understood.
Rather than step away from to say, well, the policy says this. Well, policy writers tend to be people in the organisation that are have a level of expertise in a field that come together with other people that do something similar, and maybe it becomes national guidance. That's the NFCC route.
You're dealing in a utopia often when you're writing policies.
100%. And you cannot, there are no two incidents the same. No two risk strategies would stand up to every incident type. And so as professional people, I think that's when we really step into ourselves, when we don't know that we're following something entirely because you can't, because it doesn't fit. And that's where you have to have the confidence that, we'd say the chief will back you for doing that. And rightfully, at the same time, if you've been genuinely reckless and you've not assessed it properly and you just threw
can't be carte blanche
resources at something, people at something, when it was, clearly not an environment where you could succeed, or you didn't know that the risk was proportionate and beneficial because you hadn't done an exercise. You should be asked about that, shouldn't you?
I remember being told very early on in probably one of my level 1 incident command development things many, many, many years ago. Someone said, remember, it's not your fault this fire has occurred. It's not your fault this flood has happened. You're going to do everything within your power, with your available resources, with a balance of proportional risk and your own personal risk tolerance and the benefit and the outcome of it, potential. It's not your fault. So if it does burn down, if the person has lost their life, you can't save everybody. You do so. There's no solutions, only trade-offs. As we increase our own risk in the absence of appropriate resources or technology or whatever, I have a very high risk appetite, which isn't healthy all the time, and it's cost me a lot personally and professionally at times. But I probably lean too much into the romantic side of stuff, and I do well to get calibrated by more experienced people with who have maybe experienced the bigger costs of it. I think this might be a good opportunity to segue into technology, because in Lancashire, you guys and girls did a lot of really interesting stuff, talking about flooding, talking about wildfires, talking about general fire incidents. A lot of work out there at the minute with drones, with when it comes to wildfires, some of the solutions they have with flooding. Where was that company that has the flotation thing that's got motors at the back of it, and you just drop it in the water in it? That's a wicked piece of kit. There is a couple of places that have got that, and again,
yes, we've got.
You got them as well. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there's a couple of different providers out there at the moment. The one we've got.
You guys have pushed heavily into the technology solution, because this is lots of great reasons. Whether it's way back in the day of Cobra systems and penetrating and external offensive firefighting and all that sort of jazz, moving into we haven't got to put people at risk in every scenario. And these technology things, they reduce the risk. They might be more long-term cost effective in terms of fire, reducing contamination. Morons like me will want to go into a fire forever, probably at my own personal cost. So there's a balance to be had, isn't there? So talk to me about the steps that we've made into technology, some of the emerging technologies that excite you, some of the stuff perhaps you've adopted or tested in your organisation.
Yeah, I think let's look at it from a couple of perspectives. One thing I know you've been talking about recently, and others have been, about the quadrant model and where we should be putting people and where we shouldn't be putting people. What's the assistive technology? What's the things that are going to enable us to do that more effectively then, and reduce the exposure to firefighters from the actual risk itself or from contaminants, whatever it may be. And let's see what the demands are going to be of us in the future. So try and get a crystal ball out and say, well, the climate's going to do this. The built environment, which is probably as unpredictable as it's ever been, because of the deregulation issues that happened over the last 20 years, that you cannot be certain that a building will perform in the way you expect it to perform.
Have you seen the spider system?
Have I seen, sorry?
Sorry, it's a segue. Spider system. Have you seen this thing? I don't know if it's called that. Basically, they put anchor points at the top of a high-rise building.
Ah, yes.
A drone flies up, attaches a line in it, and then you can maneuver this thing like a vending machine around it. We had a chat with the guy. He spoke to me about it. I've not had him on the podcast yet. We might do in the future. But anyway, my rabbit hole. Sorry for dragging you down there. But it's another example of trying to, not a big cost to the building. You haven't got to put one on every one. It can be retrospectively fitted. Air ladder platforms, turntable ladders. They're not doing what you think they're doing. They're good resources, but they're not a rescue thing. They're massive limitations. A lot of places you can't take them. You can't get them close to a lot of buildings. And. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. Take us back.
So you've got to try and have a look at what's that picture that's coming at us. What's the modern challenges? You've got buildings now that are being built to not have humans in them. They're being operated by robots inside of the building.
Massive Amazon warehouse.
Building like that.
Yeah.
So I think trying to then align your strategies to it. So what equipment is available to us potentially? How much is that going to reduce the impact of the incident itself overall? Can I get an early knock on an incident that it's not going to have the big cost? How much can I work with building providers to put new technology into it to reduce the risk? And try and connect these things together.
That's hard to influence, that one.
Yes.
I was down at the National Tall Buildings Conference. Is it called that? Yeah? Tall Buildings Conference. Russ Timpson. Very interesting. Really emotive environment. Wow. Because obviously there's a lot of money in construction, and the environment we can kind of blame and go, if you want to change something to do with a lake, you might have less pushback. I mean, the Environment Agency and DEFRA might have something to say something about it. But you're not, if you want to put a second stairwell in somewhere, oh, good luck.
And you're playing into an existing environment, aren't you? So what you might be able to get for future building, and what you might be able to realistically do with existing buildings. And part of this, the problem, the things that we don't yet know. So we look back on things like Grenfell and we say, okay, high rise, whole load of issues, let's deal with high rise.
Everyone's an expert in retrospect, aren't they?
Yeah, and the next event could be a care home. It could be a building that's had its use converted from from office to domestic, and doesn't perform in the way that we'd have expected it to perform. So there's so many moving parts, and even the environment stuff's all connected moving parts. You need spaces for water. Where does water go when it comes down significantly? What are the things that are going to hold it on its pathway to eventually to the sea?
You know what? I'd love to have an expert on about that.
Yeah.
When I was doing all my IFEs and stuff, me and my dad used to get down some rabbit holes around physics. Physics is wicked. Chemistry and physics, that's firefighting. You understand that, it will help you a lot. And yeah, flood defences and how people design that, I think that's a fascinating subject, personally. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, and that sometimes that's protecting another area at the risk of another one. And so you say, well, how does water flow then? And actually, what are the wetlands? Where are the trees? Where are the things that are going to absorb some of this and slow that pathway down? Because it's when the pathway is running really fast is when we get the incidents like the Cumbria Floods 2009, because it's moving so quickly through the rivers. The rivers can't hold it, so the rivers then expose properties and businesses. So they're the same places that we want kept wet for the wildland seasons. So, all these things are interconnected. And I think the more you can try and assess, and this is a CRMP, this is a community risk management plan for me, that says how well do you know and understand your area and how those moving parts fit together and where is it going?
Tell us how you get advice on that. That is a good question I'd never thought of. I've
Right.
read a lot of CRMPs, and a lot of them talk around population density, and most of it focuses around people in my limited interpretation. What are the people doing? What are the people building? How are the people living? How are they supporting themselves or not? Where do we need to help this community? How's the community diversifying? Population density, areas, all that sort of jazz. Where are our fire stations? Who else do you consult with? Not you, well, maybe you, but like when people are putting these together, because some people think, oh, they've put that together in their ivory tower, the three of them, and then punched it out there. And you read a bit and go, what do they know about that? My station at the so-and-so, you know what I mean? So it might be a good insight, actually, if you could just shine a bit of light there for us.
Before I move on to technology, so part of a decent community risk management plan should be a strategic assessment of risk.
Okay, yep.
Not just now, but looking to the future. So what do we know about building developments? Where is it going? If I've got 7,000 houses going up around me at the moment,
the who advises on that? Local council?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Usually local.
Because they get all the plan permissions for the next 5 or 10 years, yeah.
But are these things interconnected? Are these things cognizant of each other? But where you can influence, you can influence. If you can't influence, you've got to deal with what you think will be the consequence.
Yeah.
So that's when you say, okay, what's my toolbox? What's my toolbox for prevention? How do I lower the chances of something from happening? What's my toolbox around protection? How can I make the environment more resistant to something happening? What can I do in partnerships to raise awareness of all those issues? And then, how can I respond to it better? If there's flooding coming, what work have we done with communities to ensure those communities are as resilient as possible to it? What physical things can I do before the flooding occurs locally? And then how am I going to respond differently, knowing that I've got less ability to rely on national assets than we might traditionally have had? And therefore, how's that going to affect my purchasing strategy? So it doesn't mean we all have to go out and spend millions overnight. What it means is all the things you've got now, you've got a replacement schedule for. And at some point, you've got a decision to make when you replace your cutting equipment, your pumping equipment, your high reach appliances. So what's your aerial appliance strategy for the next 10 years? And when am I able to make those changes? And if you're fairly well resourced, you might say, well, I can make some of those now. If I've got to wait for the existing stuff to come to its end of life, then I might not be able to make those changes for 4 years. So how do I want to use aerial appliances? Do I want some for rescue, some of them predominantly water towers, or where we've invested in Stinger appliances? So
Yes.
the same technology that you're using to pierce through a fuselage on an aeroplane, you're now using on a standard fire engine. So it carries the same amount of people, same amount of equipment, everything's still the same. But in addition, you've got a piercing turret on there that can reach out 25 metres, that can go through the side of a building or through a roof, and give you the ability to, if it already happens to be with you, and if you've got enough of them, you have a mate pumps 5, mate pumps 6, you've probably got one anyway, it becomes an inherent tool in the box. If you
I
have,
think there's a bit
it's
of a
especially when you
monopoly,
need to order
just
it on.
to explore that rabbit hole for a second. There's a bit of a monopoly on that part of the market, isn't it? It's for me to say, not you, but I think Rosenbauer are one of the only people that do that. And if you haven't got one of their trucks, I don't know if you can put it onto other stuff. Maybe you can.
There's 2 suppliers at the moment,
Is that okay?
but the more interest there is for the more suppliers.
Yeah, they'll answer the solution for you.
Absolutely, if there's a market to compete in, they'll look to compete in it. It's interesting though. Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service got one. We did it for a year with the supplier on the basis that we could help develop it with them. I don't say we, I mean, it's the people that use it. It's the firefighters on the fire station that did the development with them, and the alterations and the changes. And it was on their approval that we then say, okay, we want to buy one after a year. And then, we're using it a lot. And it's going over into over-the-border incidents.
Cross-border, yeah.
Large scale, I don't know, recycling fires, warehouse fires. And they're going, blimey, that was a good bit of kit.
Use it,
It
punch
knocked
it
our
in,
incident.
use it, abuse it, break it.
Yeah, and it reduced, the amount of time that it was spending at an incident. It reduced the risk that you're putting firefighters into. It reduced the amount of contaminants that people would have been exposed to. And so now we've got, or it's still part of it's in the final stages of build, but we'll have 4, one in each corner of the county. Now, the second service to get one's Manchester. The next service to get one's Merseyside, then Cheshire. And that shows you that it's the experience of and the confidence in that people say, I want that as part of my strategy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily say UK Fire and Rescue Service, this is our direction of travel. We are, as I said, 44 fire and rescue services in England. I'm responsible for my budget and my CRMP and planning it out, and these things have to give a return on investment.
I want to spend a bit more time on technology, but if I don't say it now, I'll forget it. We said about prevention and education, the concept of zero responders and the concept of how our societal readiness to deal with catastrophes, incidents, flooding, Manchester Arena, whatever, London attacks. Do you think society are getting more or less, I'm pushing you into a corner here, more or less able to look after themselves? I'll go first. I think it's getting worse. I think people's ability to look after them, they're not useless and rubbish and moronic or stupid or anything like that. I just think a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, low socioeconomic reasons, people are struggling and they're not managing their lives as well, myself included, perhaps. What's your feeling from a national level? We're not going to make it about Lancashire necessarily. How do you feel like society are doing?
I think there's a responsibility on all of us to help people to be able to help themselves. So if you look at where we're going with, the National Risk Register of stuff that in order of things that could happen or the impact they're going to have if they do happen, and we have to say, okay, what do we expect? And you can. There's going to be a refresh of this anyway, but also in the light of things like the COVID inquiry. How do we say this is what the public can do for themselves in this period of time, and that means we'll have to educate and maybe provide. And therefore we'll see it's worth buildings investing in blast kits or whatever it may be off the back of things, so that zero responders have got a chance of being effective, and that they know that if they're willing and confident, them doing something as a zero responder is going to have a really good impact.
Those sort of catastrophic bleed, hemorrhage packs, you see, where everyone used to, well, we still see defibs everywhere. I mean, really, this is more perhaps important for people like the NHS, where they're just so stacked out, aren't they? And they're like, well, how can we give people the tools and the education to just deal with some of this stuff yourself? So getting a catastrophic hemorrhage pack from a local telephone box if someone's having a major bleed, or where we're not going to get to you in 10 minutes. I'm sorry. You need to be able to do something yourself, because the
Yeah, and
load is just
the
unreal.
higher availability there is of stuff like that. But I think we're going to start to see it, aren't we? We're going to start to see it in areas that have large gatherings of people will need to have some things available, and initially that's going to be to the staff. So that staff get a level of awareness and training. Hopefully, they're doing stuff really effectively around being able to spot issues and prevent some of the impact of something that could happen. But then, how do they respond? What could they be doing in that early period of time, and how can they do almost that individual assessment of risk for them to themselves?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can go down the whole of the risk register and you say, well, what's a zero responder's role? What's a first responder's potential role? And I say first responder as maybe like the building staff.
Okay.
I don't mean us as first responders.
Yeah.
When we come on as professionals, we should know what our role is in that environment. But equally, we should know what our role is that is unique to that environment. So the pandemic's a really good example here, because my fire and rescue service was was the first fire and rescue service that got involved with actually vaccinating the public. But wouldn't it have been great to know that that could be a potential role for us, that we could have, whether it's all staff, volunteers, people trained up for in advance, that when you get these rising tide events that says actually something's happened somewhere else in the globe, we're anticipating something's going to be coming here, this is how you become trained and qualified. These are the things we need people to go and do if they're willing to go and do it.
People's personal feelings about the vaccinations aside, medical interventions. What's your thoughts? And let's explore that a little bit then on co-responding. Very emotive topic for people. I love it. I'll go first. I would like us to adopt personal, risk prevention stuff's great. Community work is great. I would rather go to medical calls than help fit a stair lift for Mrs. Goggins. Personally, that's my personal feelings.
I understand that opinion entirely, and
Some people hate it. Some unions are very much against it. Are they against it? No, they want to see people financially recognised for it in the role map and all the bits there. Sometimes I don't know how much we help and hinder the process in our efforts and the conversations. You'll know more about it than I will.
And which is a difficult place to be, isn't it? To have those conversations where, different parts of the system. So you look at the NJC and what the NJC is and how that represents the employers, the role of NFCC and how that connects or doesn't connect, particularly with that process. And
so we don't get lost in mnemonics. Tell people what the NJC is briefly.
So the National Joint Council, so that's where the employer's side meet the employee's side, which typically, the largest group on there is Fire Brigades Union, but it does include other trade unions. And you'll see that replicated in other, in other professions. That's where
places like Cornwall, they've been doing it for ages.
Well, there are different services doing different forms of co-responding with different parts of their workforce, and that's the challenge, really. So we can do what we want locally, but coming to a position where
you have to have local agreements and all that jazz.
Yeah, local agreements. And do you use volunteers? Do you use your on-call side of the workforce and not your whole-time side of the workforce? It's different in different parts of the country. But what do we mean when we mean co-responding? Co-responding is something like 132 call types. Now,
I want to go to heart attacks. That's what heart attacks, major bleeds, because you're doing that already. I turn up at an RTC tomorrow, someone's bleeding out, or they've had a heart attack, cardiac arrest, whatever. You're going to do it anyway. You're doing it anyway. Now, I don't want to go, because people say, if my child is suffering with anaphylactic shock, I don't want Justin wandering in with his level 1 first aid, treating my child. Yeah. We're not going to go to the really weird complex stuff, because that needs a paramedic and someone with training in drugs. But we can go to the stuff that we already have the tools to do it. And I know people dislike me saying this sometimes, but I'm like, I don't mind going to them. I like going to them.
And what we know is that form of co-responding is all about time. That high level, that red one, or whatever it is we're currently calling that level of cardiac arrest, or something that's happened in the local community. We know from other parts of the world that as soon as you can get something happening, the more chance they've got of surviving. If it happens on the street,
we've got training personnel, we've got the kit on the trucks. We can be the answer to that. Ambulance might be 4 hours away.
Pretty low volume. So if I looked at the county that I'm in Lancashire, there are probably something around 20 to 24 cardiac arrests a day. Now, Fire and Rescue Service isn't going to get offered most of those if another asset is closer. And so when we've done pilots on things like that in the past, they're fairly rare. Not that we did a pilot across the whole of the fire service. We did it at 1.6 stations, but they weren't happening all that often. But when they did happen, in many cases, sadly, you get called to a cardiac arrest because someone's passed away. And, you have to train your staff to be able to... That's an unfamiliar environment. It's certainly in that way. It's not come as a consequence of something we were already going to. Your analogy is something different. But there will be occasions in there where you get there. You're only going because you're going to get there faster. You are going to use the skills that by and large you've already got, that can be improved upon. You're going to use the defibs that hopefully you've already got on your fire engine. And you're going to use the new partnership that you've got in terms of trauma cells, and working with the other co-responding community to make a difference. And there were occasions in Lancs where people were saved. People we're currently still doing it, and we've had some fabulous successes of people that, in the opinion of the professionals on that, would not have lived. And that isn't providing a significant impact on our ability to do the rest of our job. That is saying,
I think it gives more fulfillment
everybody
as well
who can
for
respond
operational
should
people,
respond.
that they know they have a skill set and the ability to do that. I think a lot of people take a lot of fulfillment from it. I say whenever I go to gain entries and stuff and the ambulance isn't there anyway, I end up doing it. Not me personally, or I have done it, but we're doing it anyway. So I think it's just going to happen at some point, but it feels like a loggerheads, and you'll know more from a national perspective the challenges that are faced by this, but I don't know.
It's certainly the complexities of that operating environment. And I don't think, although you'll have very strong individual views, that will vary from place to place, and within small teams, people with almost opposing. I don't think you'll have a trade union out there that will say, we're fundamentally opposed to the concept of this. What they'll say is, well, what's the design of it look like? What's the limits of it? And how does it work in these occasions? And how are you going to recognise this? And if I was leading a trade union, and I am a trade unionist, I've always been involved in trade unions of negotiating and looking after the conditions of service for staff. They wouldn't be doing their job properly if they weren't asking to understand what that might mean in terms of a broader skill set that's used more regularly. And what impact would that have on their core role? All of those things I think are easy to work out. The difficult bit comes from, where does new money come from? Yeah. And is that Department of Health that are happy to say, well, actually, if we divert some of our money that way, we'll get this net benefit.
NHS have got a lot of money and they struggle to get staff. We've got staff, We've got staff and appetite. We just struggle with the money. I'm not
Yeah.
saying NHS have got an endless pot, but it's a big budget.
And I've been involved in some of those conversations nationally, and it is
It's
it's
a large,
incredibly
lumbering
frustrating.
beast to work with, isn't it? The
Yeah,
NHS.
and it changes. Governments change, people change within those environments. We change. We're all sort of moving and changing, and that's the job of the strategic leader in that environment is to try and keep refreshing relationships, revisiting conversations that you've had with somebody else before, with someone who's new, that have got their own list of priorities that they've come in with, or their own views on the world and how it should operate. And you've got to say, well, okay, that influence I've managed to have and that progress that we've made, I've now got to do again.
Do
And
it all again.
he's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you keep pushing it forward. But when it's such a big issue like that, um, you've got to herd a lot of cats for a long time. So you've not just got to get them together;
Without
you've got
any
to keep them
wavering of
together.
enthusiasm.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, you'll have some form of regime change somewhere, and
Yeah. Oh no, she's not
and
here anymore.
new
No.
direction setting, and well, actually, we're not into localism anymore. We're into centralism, or we're going away from centralism into localism, and go. Okay, so we're not going to have multiple fire services merging into one. We're going to see mayoral models everywhere, and
Yeah.
those they're going to get the efficiency out of combined back offices and stuff like that. So those things are your ever-changing operating environment that you've got to try and be as successful as you can. But the longer my experience is, the longer an issue is going to take to resolve, the less chance there is of resolving it successfully because of the component parts keep shifting, unfortunately, which can be incredibly demoralising.
I want to transition back, close the loop on technology, and then I want to move us into fire. How are you doing on time? Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Fantastic, thank you. Drones and robots. You last year saw a really interesting piece of work. Was it last year, year before? Talk to me about the robot technology that you've seen coming out, the appetite for it, the ones you've trialed, and we'll close the loop on that. And then I want to go into some health and wellbeing and fitness for firefighters. But that robot was very interesting innovation. Had lots of pros and cons. People liked it, some didn't.
Yeah, we always worry about technology, don't we? We always think, is it going to replace us? Is it going to limit the good parts of the job?
Yeah,
And I think the more we know and understand, and I think back to my early parts of my career and where we were breathing apparatus and where we didn't, and how we carried kit. Our knowledge is changing. Is there technology that can assist in that, and has it got its place? Because it's no one thing's going to be a panacea, and it's not going to say, oh, now we've got robots, we're not going to send people in to build jobs or something like that, because they'll have their places. And so we're trialing a robot that is able to bring firefighting media and cameras and infrared, or even air measuring devices into places that traditionally I would have put firefighters in there to set up
monitoring devices.
a
Yeah, or
monitor.
yeah,
Within no time at all, that monitor needs repositioning or is left there, and it's having very little effect other than adding to the water runoff, which is
yeah.
a different challenge.
Throwing water over the top of the building.
Yeah, or it's something that we did, and it's actually draining off our effectiveness of being, having decent water pressure for something else. So you've got something that's much more controllable, much more dynamic, and it's not putting people at risk. Is that going to be available and useful at a lot of incidents? No. But your high bay warehouses, your recycling centres, and recycling centres now is another issue of climate change, isn't it? So we're not going to get rid of recycling centres. We're going to have more problems with them. So we're going to get more recycling centre fires. And so these things have got a place. But again, we'll do it in the right way. So we'll take it on for a year. We'll evaluate it. We'll see if we can help them develop the technology for use in our application. That's
I'll give them an
often
opportunity.
yeah. And at the end of that year, we might say, okay, that's 60k. Has it given us more than 60k's worth of benefit? Has it reduced the scale of an incident, the duration of an incident, in our professional opinion? Has it reduced the risk to firefighters? Has it made us more effective? In which case, I've got a perfect business case to take to the fire authority. All straightforward. We used it for a year. This is the situation that we're in. So that this is developing, and I don't think it's again not the panacea, but it's another tool in the box, like a Stinger appliance or a Scorpion appliance. The drone technology stuff is fascinating. Well, we've led on drones for about a decade now, and each time they innovate, they become twice as good for half the price.
Yeah.
A bit like
Well,
most
because
technology.
also you're benefiting from the fact that a large amount of the public use these things as well. So the technology has been funded from everywhere. And I always think like, as soon as we crack the legislative element of it, you're going to see Amazon drones everywhere. That's when we've cracked that nugget. And that won't necessarily be a good thing. Some people will absolutely hate it. But we had a guy, oh God, I can't remember the name of the company now, but they had these massive drones and they were using them for searching at sea. They're using them for, you can carry like a 6 kilo payload, so they could take it up to the top of Ben Nevis and drop off drop off a defib. They were using them for snake venoms or like any kind of venom antidote things, whatever it's called. They had a little refrigeration storage on it, and they could take it across nature reserves, like where there's 60 kilometers between you and the first aid and you're going to die in the next 10 minutes. So globally, yeah, the application of this stuff is so exciting.
Yeah, and the funding that's there. And but we might get a chance to talk about ACER, which is
Yeah,
the
we will.
Academic Collaboration, Research and Evaluation. Our partnership with universities, effectively, that I've established on behalf of NFCC with Rowena, Professor Rowena Hill from Nottingham Trent University. But just to focus on what we can achieve from drones. So each time they develop, there's more capability and lower cost. And what we're able to do is work with those companies to exploit the environments that we can operate in. So it's all great, isn't it? Developing technology so it can do this, this, and this, but you need an environment to prove your concepts in.
Yeah.
And we're a great environment for that.
Great playground.
Yeah, indoor drones.
We got stuff happening every day.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got the CAA permissions, we've got the exemptions, we've got the qualified pilots to work with them. I have a team of on-call firefighters.
I know you do. How do you get onto that team?
Well, you put your hand up because they are a virtual team. They're not a station.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they have 4x4 off-road vehicles with loads of tech on it, and they deploy whenever we want it. And
Do they assist the police with missing persons as well?
Yes.
That's a good bit of work to get into as well.
Yeah, we do high-risk MISPers. And we've assisted in what's turned out to be murder investigations as well, longer term. But you're in the early stage of the incident. And so the drone technology now, the level of mapping that you can zoom in on with Google. If you put a drone up now, that can fly a mapping sequence. You're not really flying the drone. You've told it what to do.
Yeah, you just
that
give it
can
a
map
grip
an
and it
area.
goes
So
there,
if you
yeah.
want to map a large area, moorland for moorland fires,
Wildfires, yeah.
if you want to
Amazing.
map an area because there's a high risk missing person, you're not even trying to find the missing person. You're mapping it. Then you can take that SD card out and you can zoom to your heart's content, and you could be looking for anything that might identify and give you some information. Fantastic technology that's evolving really, really quickly. Things that
I've seen the use of it in agricultural environments as well, where they, searching acres and acres and hectares of their crop and whatever, and it's just like the application of it. It's just like
It's
you
so
start thinking
great.
outside the box. It's wicked.
Yeah, and each time somebody explains what's going on next, I'm like, wow. So we're not too far off being able to, autonomous drones, being able to send them directly to the scene of an incident. So you've got eyes on an incident before you've managed to get your fire engines there by road conditions. So
And they
that's
need to
not
help
too
you
far away.
sectorize it and manage it and understand the complexity of that.
Size it up, and all those things that you would want to be able to do. And people would be, if you're sceptical, you'd say, "Oh, you'd size down incidents." You'd say, "Well, I can't see anything. Let's not bother going." No, this is giving you more information than you've currently got, that you might want to size up an incident quicker than you would have done, because you're not waiting for the first appliance to get there. But these drones now can identify moving parts, so they can identify vehicles, people, stuff like that, and track them dynamically, autonomously. The indoor drones that our people fly, tiny indoor drones that are going into collapsed structures
Yeah.
now, and helping you develop that operational plan about what you're sending, identify where people are at risk. We didn't have those when we deployed over to Turkey as part of ISAR, but we have them now. And you just see that would have been a great addition.
So we not waste, but like we spend so much time on that first recce, where it's really difficult and traumatizing for the staff as well because you're moving from site to site, unable to do anything because you're just going to assess. You're just going to assess work sites, in ISAR, and you have to pass by people that are screaming for you to help them and pull you inside. And total transparency, I haven't been on any of the deployments, but I've had many people on that have spoken about it. And just the amount of time and efficiency you could save picking the right work sites and getting your resources and equipment in the right place at the right time, huge.
Yeah, and looking at that deployment, and I have listened to the podcast for that. I know some of the staff that were involved, but that technology's moved on further still. But you can couple that technology now because we lead on dogs
Oh, yeah.
and the use of dogs. We're now training the dogs to follow the drones.
Oh my God.
So you've got those smaller drones because you want to say, well, actually, this is the last known area or something like that. Then instead of the dog following command in that way, you could have the drone pointing out where the dog's to go. And you can do it with laser pens and stuff like that. But using canine ability alongside drone technology is our next little leap. And that's a really exciting one. We're doing it at Lancs. Lindsay Selsky,
cool.
she's doing some other work on it now. It's fantastic stuff. So that's above ground drones, and we've got underwater drones now. So there's no capability in the UK Fire and Rescue Service to do subsurface rescue.
I was about to say, this is another thing where we go, and this is where we don't map up with the ambulance and the police as well, because we'll say we don't do subsurface rescue. The police don't do subsurface rescue, they do body recovery. And you'll know far better than me, our interpretation of life extinct versus the NHS and ambulance, how long someone will survive in water, dependent on age, conditions, blah, blah, blah. All of these things don't interlink very well. And that's where I think we have some of our challenges when it comes to, these two young people say the person's just gone into the water, they went in just there, we can't see them. Okay, well, we don't do subsurface, but they've only gone in a minute ago. That whole thing. Difficult.
And that's that very early Jessup conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
That tries to understand, what's happened and what the prognosis is and the opportunity is, what that window is going to be. So we took our first drone, and it's almost like a hobby drone, it's about £3,500, that you can throw into the water. It's tethered, so you can get it back, which is important. But you can get visual line of sight if the water's clear.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got people in there, you've broken ice, and people have been churning up the surface, or it's flowing in a particular way, you're not going to be able to do that. So we've now got the only in fire and rescue service in the UK underwater drone with certainly a better range of cameras, but also sonar technology. But then you need people to be able to understand sonar. It's a skill in itself.
Trying to interpret the stuff it's telling you.
Oh, well, for me, when people are showing me it, it's a bit like when somebody says, here's the baby scan. I can't work anything out of that unless somebody really points it out to me.
I vaguely understand ultrasound.
Yeah,
okay.
But so sonar is another skill set that we've had to give our staff more and more exposure to be able to
I
do
even
it.
think about this way back with thermography. Like how little training we give. You give a half an hour familiarization with the thermal imaging camera and expect people to correctly, appropriately apply thermal imaging camera tool and identify flow paths. And we just give it to them and go, it's a bit like a camera. You know what a camera is? Point camera, look camera, monkey see, monkey do. And I'm like, we're doing a disservice. No wonder they don't use them very effectively.
Right. But that's also got an arm on it, a clamping arm. And it's tethered as well. And you can use it in fast flowing water. Um, so you can locate and you can recover, and we have located and recovered, and we've done that in Lancashire, but we've also done it all around the country. Now, if you're using it outside of our area, within I say an hour of response, then really you're going to be doing location and recovery. You're not going to be doing rescue, and we haven't. To be fair, we haven't done rescue in county either yet. I do think the day will come. But what you are doing then is you are bringing closure to that family.
Mm-hmm.
You are reducing you pretty much bringing a stop to the incident. Something that could have been a multi-agency incident over a number of days
Many
with
tens of thousands of
resources.
pounds of resource.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
not to mention the volunteers and the local resiliency forums and all the organisations that will step up to
And all that
support.
increased trauma on a family. So we
Yeah.
have now, on a number of occasions, within an hour or 2 hours of being on scene, located the casualty in sometimes a large body of water.
Mm.
They've been located and then retrieved. And so you look at the technology of something like that, you say, well, that costs. I think that's somewhere between £60,000 and £80,000 once you've added all the things you want on it, all the gadgets, that are going to give you more tools in the box when it's underwater. But you pay for that in one instant.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That's what we've got to think about it.
And so what we do is we offer it nationally on the National Resilience Register list of assets. Because I want the staff that use it to have the most experience they can using it, so that they build up their expertise. And I want other areas to see it in action, to understand the benefit that it brings, because it's actually, you can do nice PowerPoint presentations, you can do little videos and stuff like that, and it all feels a bit sales and a bit commercial.
Yeah.
But actually, if people use something,
Experience it. Yeah.
experience it, and say, do you know what, that
Wow.
made the difference to that incident?
Yeah.
If it's
And then if
school
it's a
kids
shared
getting a top
resource
of
and
them.
a regional asset, it becomes more affordable for everybody as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's again, you say, well, what do I want to use it for? Now, if you say, well, I want to use it for rescue, then the bigger that region, the less that's likely. If I want to be able to use it to collapse a scene and to bring closure and to, I think even sometimes just putting in a small drone, £3,500, means you've got something happening subsurface that's helping you to bring an incident to a conclusion, or at least to direct any assets that might end up going into the water. So, back into that earlier conversation about operational discretion and risk and reward.
Take me sideways to ASA. So obviously
Mm.
we've had Rowena Hill on. If people want to go back and listen to Dr. Hill, really fascinating lady. We're going to be doing more work together with her and her colleagues because I'm super excited. Academics bring receipts. Academics have helped us pair together some of our visceral feelings with some really good data. Talk to me about why you've been so passionate about this, why you've pushed so hard. And you're not the only person. There's a team of people that have helped with this, of course. Why should we invite more academics into our sector?
Well, you've hit it. You've absolutely hit it. I need to make persuasive arguments, with people that control large funding, and I can do that if I've got evidence. I often have, professionalism, experience, information, but I don't often have the large scale data and the
Mm.
stuff that's independently academically robust. Will withstand peer challenge, is deep enough and long enough forms of study
You've got your own
to
unconscious
make that.
biases because of
Yeah,
your own personal experiences. We all do.
yeah. So what we did effectively is we had a look at the way we were historically engaging universities, and it was, your local fire service, they've got a relationship with their local university, and they've done a few bits in there here and there, and we've never necessarily got the global benefit of the work that was done. It might be a bit hit and miss on its uptake. It didn't feed nationally into anywhere. That's why we set up organisational learning. At the moment, we've got operational learning. Now we've got organisational learning, so all those things can feed in. But importantly, what we've done is we've mapped all the different academic disciplines that touch our sector in some way, shape, or form. For building safety. There are so many things in there from sciences, but then there's behavioural factors in there. So then there's lots of psychological stuff that's involved. Or how do you create prevention activities that genuinely change people's approach?
Yeah, mindsets and approaches.
Effectiveness.
Anna Templeton, I think. Is it Anne Templeton? We had her on. I'm going to misquote her. It might not have even been her. It was Anne, or it was Nikki Woods, maybe one of the two. Spoke about the language that we use when giving advice on evacuations and how we structure our conversations to get people on board. Psychology, I love it. Oh God, I've talked to him for hours. Academics are fascinating.
Yeah. Well, my early exposure to it was getting involved in the for NFC firefighter fitness standards. And
that is a big rabbit hole I want to explore heavily in a moment. So feel free to go there now if you want to.
Well, I'll touch on it and then see if you want to go back. But we worked with the University of Bath. It's the first national collaboration to do some work like that of its case. It's about £1 million worth of research that we could tap into and work with somebody and come up with something that was robust and legally defensible, was occupationally based. And we saw the benefit of doing something once for everybody nationally. But the benefit of what we get with ASA, so the University of Bath sit on ASA, Anastec with the contaminants work, University of Lancashire, Central Lancashire, sits on ASA. The psychologists that you were talking about, they sit on ASA. And the beauty of it is, it's a bit like the Francis Crick Institute, where sometimes academic disciplines can work in silos. What we do is we start with the problem, and actually all the different disciplines can start to look at it from their perspectives and their incredible academic knowledge bases, and they can help you define what the problem is, work out what your scope of your research is, and so consequently
the dots from a lot of work that's already been done as well.
Oh yeah,
that we're
exactly.
just largely unaware of.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. That's part of the process. So, okay, this is the problem, and what I say problem, what we call them is areas of research interest. That's what Professor Rowena Hill would have been talking about. We've got so many areas that we say these are things we are actively interested in. Understanding climate change or national resilience and all these things that are part of our operating environment. How can those academics work with us to identify what's already out there, what the gaps are, and then usefully propose how we might go about giving that gap?
To support a robust business case for change.
100%. And so then it's a much easier conversation. Bear in mind, sometimes if you sit down with a minister, you might have half an hour with a minister. That minister will have a number of people with them that are going to make records and follow up on things you've spoken about.
Poke holes in your argument. Sometimes.
Well, they may well do, yeah. They need to do proper diligence, don't they? But
of course they do. They have an obligation to. They're spending the public's money. You've
got that half an hour. And during that half an hour, they might want to talk to you about things as well. And I've got half an hour, so I've got a pitch. I've got a pitch that hits your agenda, and you understand why it contributes to this broader agenda. And in that pitch, I need something compelling, which is often the impact story, but I need the data to back it up.
Have you heard of the Wowham and Whiffam models? Presentation?
I'm not sure.
Salespeople, I learnt this when I was in an old job. Wowham, big statistics, emotive, empowering. The elephant and the rider thing. So the elephant is your emotions stuff. The rider is logic and mindset and cognitive decision making, all that sort of stuff. And then the WIFM, what's in it for me acronym. So wow and with, these are all the facts. You know this, environmental change, aging firefighters. What's in it for me? How is this going to help you manage our budget, have a longer, more engaging workforce, reduce people leaving the services, increase longevity, all that sorts. You've got to remember who your audience is and what's in it for them, haven't you? You can't just be
So
like, this is really important. People are dying. Firefighters are getting cancer. Okay, I'm sorry. What's in it for me? I care. I care a lot. But, and?
and how does it fit with their current priorities? How does it fit with an incoming government's priority? How can you paint that picture for them and join those dots? And I think that's what we said right at the start about why are you going forward to be in a position? You're going in there hopefully to be able to have more influence, and if you're going to have more influence, you need to be able to put that across, understanding other people's perspectives and what's creating their pressures, what's creating their agendas, and how do you be as effective as you can be in there. And I think sometimes when people were developing, they think that because they've got a strong rationale for something, that they just need to almost hit you over the head with it, and
I'm just
then
going
you'll
to beat
say,
you with
"Okay,
my logic. No, no, no. Don't doubt your logic.
yeah,"
But
because you
help
can
me
be
solve my
absolutely
problem
right
as well.
about something, but you also need to get somebody to say, "I agree with you, and I'm going to do something for you about it."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that can be in environments where you've got no power. You got into that environment. That's what the position does, but it doesn't necessarily give you any power in that environment. And so your ability to be able to perspective shift, your ability to be able to try and genuinely understand other people's issues, challenges, pressures, and be part of their solutions too. That doesn't mean inappropriately painting the wrong picture. It just means saying, like, how can we work together to what I think are common areas of interest. But ASA, it's really exciting. I mean, to be in that environment. Talk about as you develop and you go into environments and you feel like imposter syndrome. You sat in an environment where everybody is an eminent professor. They are a doctor of this, that, and the other. And I joined to go out to incidents on fire
Yeah.
engines, and
They don't care how many
you
babies
just
you've
have to learn
rescued.
to be uncomfortable and then
Yeah.
and roll with it until you are. But then when it's effective, it's brilliant.
Yeah. So continuing down that rabbit hole of firefighter fitness, you wrote a great article that you shared with me back from 2014, and there's a very emotive quote in the middle of it. Without immediate intervention, my opinion is we are on a collision course akin to approaching an asteroid. Talk to me about the aging of firefighters, the constant extension of how long we'll be working for, the physical readiness and preparedness of our staff, fitness standards. I have very strong views on it, which I'm going to reserve for a moment so I don't fill you with my own bias, although I know we're probably going to speak into a little bit of an echo chamber here. Where do you think we are? What do you think the role of our leaders and the expectations of our staff and the age? And is this equation working? Are we setting people up for success?
That's really difficult because the interesting thing for me is I wrote that, as you said, 2014. So we're now, and I said that asteroid is going to start to hit us in 10 years' time, and it is to a varying extent in different places. And what I tried to do in it was to not just talk about firefighter fitness, but to talk about the long-term exposure to contaminants, the impact of shift work, a lot of
Our
the things that
holistic
we,
fitness, our
yeah,
holistic health and well-being, yeah. Because
yeah,
there's many going academic articles about shift work and all-cause mortality and cancer. You
yeah.
know,
In fact, most professions have things that, if you don't mitigate against them, can cause you problems long
definitely.
term. If you do anything for long enough, even if you sit at a screen and type, then you are going to increase your risk of something or other. So it's about knowing and understanding that. But in this particular time, and you have to remember everything that was going on around that time, around the dispute and pension change. I took a bit of flack um, for um, going out and writing articles around what I thought the challenges were. And sometimes I think you have to do that as a leader and put your tin hat on. And
If you're not going to stick your head above the parapet, then you're
yeah,
almost really um, being very disingenuous, and that's where people go, "Oh, Justin, you've changed." Now you will have
yeah.
changed, and you should have changed because you know different, and you've had insights into things now. But you shouldn't abandon, your values altogether.
And it spoke to, there was there are some real issues in aging firefighting
Hmm.
and
Men and
increasing
women, and women
the
we don't
rate
really know
that
enough about.
people do
There's
it
another one.
to
Yeah.
means that more people are going to fall into that category. And if we don't put the right intervention strategies in upstream, then we increase the volume of the failure. And that was all predicted. And that, I had a meeting with the then Fire Minister at the time, but um, I had to work hard to get into that environment. And it was right when a load of stuff was going on. And to know that I shared those views and gave them in the right places. But ultimately, if you look at what was going with the pension stuff at the time, the 2006 scheme had already changed that. So there's the rights and wrongs of changing it for people that weren't in there, and I've got my own personal views on that. But either way, there's a challenge coming when people have got to get to 60. And if you've got to get to 60 and you're doing that on the fire engines throughout that period of time, then we're going to need to make changes now to avoid the worst of it that happened. Because the studies out there would tell you we do become less active, even as firefighters, as we age. We become a bit more sedentary. Some of the other things that we engaged in, we stopped doing. Or some of the things we carried on doing, we probably should have stopped doing, like contact sports, if we want to give ourselves the best chances. So there are so many factors in there
And natural physiological changes which we didn't know enough about as well.
yeah, yeah,
You know?
and
Women and
and
menopause
so
being an example.
yeah, which is it's a really good one, isn't it? Because if you go back to the ACER conversation, what's the data on that from the existing workforce? One is we weren't collecting it, and two, there wouldn't have been a large pool of people to be able to supply you the data at that point. And although there are times that it's more likely that a woman will hit menopause, that can happen at other points. But there's no real data sources for us, and we didn't even have, and we still don't have it now, nationalised, anonymised data sets of the impact of fitness and the decline in age. And if you're testing 6 monthly, does that mean you keep more of your staff fit
Hmm.
without the peaks and the troughs?
Yeah.
And is that the ideal model? Or if you test yearly, or some people back then were only doing a 3 yearly medical. There's a real mixed picture. And what we wanted to do was come up with some guidance that would say, here is a starting point standard.
Hmm.
And what it didn't take into account, that's like for a core firefighter,
Hmm.
but there is no fitness standard that's been empirically measured in the same scientific way for urban search and rescue, international
No.
search and rescue, swift water rescue. So it was a starting point. But again, you're in an environment where we didn't have a national body to go to and ways of tapping into national funding that we've now set up with ASA. So I'm hoping that's going to be the vehicle for things like that in the future. So it was the start of a journey, and probably needs reviewing now against all of the data that's now out there. We'd have to find a way of collecting it all in from each of the 50 services and aggregating it together and say, well, where is the UK Fire and Rescue Service at the moment? Because I think it would be a better place.
I think it would be. I want to ask a couple of emotive questions, push you into a bit of a corner if you'll allow me to. Um, So let's come away for a second around just physical fitness. I'll ask you, there's been a lot of work gone in around toxicology and contamination because of the very emotive subject of cancer. So I think we're really accelerating forward on that, and luckily something like that, a lot of unions are heavily behind. So I think the work in decontamination is, and the blood work that's been done in a lot of services is fantastic. Sleep. Sleep and well rested, fit first responders. Now, the argument when people go, yeah, you're lucky to still have your beds. Yeah, I agree, we are. Police and ambulance don't have them. Okay, allow me a facetious example where if my next door neighbours aren't treating their kids very well, does that mean it's okay for me to do it? I don't think we should I'm not being offensive, lower ourselves to the way in which other first responders, I personally feel, are treated. Because I think police and paramedics, I don't have any data available to me, but I know my brother-in-law's a paramedic. Their careers are very short. I think it's an average of 6 or 7 years they'll stay in a career for. And police, I don't know what the data is on that, but I know they struggle with the recruitment for lots of other reasons, not just the fact that they're not well rested and looked after. Should firefighters still go to bed at work?
I think they should be adequately rested at work.
That's a
It's a
good
personal
answer.
view, and it is based on science.
Yes, it is.
And my eldest son's a paramedic. His wife's a nurse.
Yeah, mate.
I listen to some people and you think, I'm glad he doesn't currently do that pattern now, but I'm glad I don't have firefighters, completely up during 2 days, followed by completely up during 2 nights.
You
Because
stretch the time horizon on that. What does that look like when you're 45, 50, in terms of your health, well-being, your skin, your sleep, how
yeah,
much you've aged, your testosterone, your everything,
that whole
everything.
thing, there's lots of studies out there, and we've seen some of them, about that. I want to say circadian rhythm. But
Circadian rhythm? Yep.
you you need to be in a pattern that's consistent in order for your body to be able to adjust. So I think when you've got people that are, if you're up 2 days followed by up 2 nights consistently without adequate rest, then you will never get in a good rhythm. You'll always outside of that, and so that's going to have an effect. And then they have been able to pinpoint in nighttime workers that are
I was
constantly
about
up.
to say, we're not in isolation here. There's lots of
No,
studies around factory workers as well.
yeah, and they will be able to pick out now genetic changes
Yeah.
that are the start of that, that sort of cancer journey or whatever it may be. So no, I do think it's something it's under researched from a fire and rescue service perspective, and I do think that ASA environment gives us the ability to be able to do that. But there are broader ramifications and knock-ons. If you're a flexi officer, and I've been a flexi officer for I'm guessing 24 years, that pager goes off. You're at home on your own. Pager goes off. It instantly, the cortisol
Your
spikes,
cortisol
and
levels. And that's what I
yeah,
was thinking when you were saying at the beginning of our conversation around being on call all the time. We're
mm.
drip feeding you cortisol.
Oh yeah,
You're supposed to have that. If we go back to our primitive origins, you're supposed to only get adrenaline and cortisol in a big surge for a short period of time. You hear the saber-toothed tiger, your body switches off.
that's
The
right.
term, if you excuse my language, shit scared, is because when an animal gets surprised, it takes away all of its energy from digestion and it either poos everything out or vomits it up because you get that big surge and it switches off your digestion, it switches off your defense mechanisms, it switches off so much stuff. None of your hair grows, skin grows, all that stuff, because you're supposed to only have cortisol in your system for a short period of time. We've moved into an age now where we're drip feeding everybody with cortisol and stress on a
Mm.
daily basis, and it switches off your immune system. You get colds more. I don't. I don't think this is sustainable, and because it's a long term, the lag measure is so far down the line. It's a bit like smoking. You have a cigarette today, you'll probably be fine. You have one every day for the next 20 years, you're probably going to get something bad. You go to the gym today, you're not going to see a difference tomorrow. But that compounding effect of these small daily habits,
Mm.
there's a million books out there people could bore themselves with. I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I don't think this is good.
It's not. So everything that we've spoken about is in that 2014 article that I wrote. That's in there too. What are it's not just that, you isolate that one. What about all these things when they compete with each other? That are in play. We're not going to get rid of it because we're not going to say, well, we can eliminate all these things because we're going to need to respond, and to respond effectively, we'll respond hopefully rested and ready to go. And I don't think anybody out there is saying, well, I would like to do 6 months of nights, please, or something like that. That might be a better way of overall managing that scientifically, of how you manage the rhythm, and then how else do you get the vitamin D into you, and
Yeah.
all the things that you're going to miss as a consequence of that. It's just about how do we best mitigate all of these things together, and how do we avoid unintentional consequences of dreamed up changes that are
Hmm.
going to make us more financially efficient. Well, financially efficient at what cost?
At what cost? Yeah.
And and unless we can answer those questions with decent data, we should be careful
Mm.
of the decisions that we make. And we the lag indicator one is that you just mentioned is a good one, because we've done some things and taken some decisions, making sure that people wear proper RPE,
Mm.
that they wear breathing apparatus for outdoor fires, for car fires and stuff like that. Wasn't when I joined the job. And actually, the move to get people to wear breathing apparatus at car fires took quite a lot of pushback
Hmm.
because of the implication of service in the set, and we're out in the open, and
Yeah.
you can
Not that bad.
hold your breath for a bit, do some firefighting, come out, and get yourself a fresh lungful of air and go back in again. And now we know so much about the
If we'd have known better, we'd have
carcinogen.
done better. Now we know better, and there seems just an undeniable wave of academic research behind it. It kind of, you're almost, if you're not changing now, there's almost an accusation you're doing it out of malice, because you can't claim naivety anymore. You can't claim, oh, I just didn't know. No, you did know. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. This is a corporate risk now.
Yeah,
A lot
and
of these
these are the
things are
big
doing.
building block stuff. They are, make sure you wear RPE. This was the big ticket items. Eventually you come down to smaller issues that you can work on, and mostly work on culturally.
Yeah, there's a
That
lot of behavioural
discipline
stuff that
around
can be
stuff.
done. Yeah. Hasn't got
Yeah,
to be an expensive asset acquisition. A lot of it is behavioural, and the decontamination shower within the hour and all that sort of jazz, time distance shielding with radiation and contamination.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
and we are, we're naturally concerned with things we can't see.
yeah,
That's why radiation and chemical incidents, we tend to have a little bit more concern. And
yeah,
if you can see something in front of you, you can see the fire in front of you, you can see
yeah,
the
yeah,
RTC in front of you. It's all right. How we do it? So there's something there we can't see. But we'll take those big decisions. We ensure that people have it culturally ingrained to follow it, and hopefully that lag indicator stuff demonstrates in time that that decision back in 2005 for my service at the time to make sure that people were breathing up coal fires is starting to show up in something that's taking
yeah.
20, 25, 30 years to manifest itself as a challenge.
Two of my favourite quotes there. One is, "What would me tomorrow want me today to do?" for yourself, but also true leadership, and it's not my quote at all, but is when men and women will plant trees under which they will never sit. Some of these changes are not going to happen within your time period, whoever you may be listening, but do something that the firefighter of 10 years from now wished you'd have done. The best time to plant a tree was 5 years ago. The second best time is right now,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
then the
I
future will
like.
benefit from that. I want to be enormously respectful of your time. We've been talking for nearly 2.5 hours, which will just fly by.
Can I just
You
add a
are in.
quick addition just onto that one
Yes,
part
please. Sorry,
when we
go
were
on.
talking about the things that you're building for today? We spent £400,000 redesigning the sort of breathing apparatus area at the training centre. You can't spend that easily overnight at every one of your locations, but what you can do is instill the content, the
And I will
mindset, the
say, it's
set.
one of the best ones in the country, and I've been to most of them now. Lewis and the team, and there's lots of other people involved there. incredible training facility, fantastic. And the team are very engaged and they're really leading on a
Yeah,
lot of education around the wider sector. So I want to give that acknowledgement to him
yeah.
and the rest of the team. It's not Lewis is just a friend of mine I've had on. He's a small part of a massive machine, but
But
he's
they
one
designed it.
example. Yeah,
It's the people that were there designed the system. And then, so you think the amount of churn that we've had, I mean, about a third of our workforce has changed in the last 6 years. So everybody that's come in since then has started with, the most current, up-to-date ways of doing things. They're not having to retrain themselves and think about things differently. They've come in that way. And that's, and every time then somebody comes back to training centre, that sort of reinstall, that methodology that you don't necessarily need to go and paint the floors on a fire station red, amber, green,
yeah,
because you know what it is. But you can, in time, you can, when you refit stations, build new ones, redesign them, you can. But it's the psychology that's really.
100%. Talking about psychology, you're entering a period of your career now, and I wanted to ask you about this because I think it's a really important thing that I think a lot of people in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, and no doubt further afield, but certainly here at home, retirement. We started with it. I'd love for us to close with it. Getting off that speeding train is a difficult transition for a lot of people. We're all more than just the thing we do. The fire service was here long before us. It will be here long after. We're just custodians of this global thing, and we're trying to leave it better than we found it. How have you found this transition? Did you get any advice on it? You've said even into the past few weeks, again, for a timestamp, we're recording this in beginning of February 25. So it is a very recent change to your life. You're not a spring chicken anymore, but you're also not a very old man. So there's a lot of life and adventure left in what you're going to do. Talk to us a little bit around how you've navigated this, how you've found it, a bit of a death of an identity, perhaps, because who are you now? For some people, they have that real horrible feeling of the floor drops away from them and they're no longer part of the thing. They haven't got an ID card anymore. How's it been?
Again, I think it's another one where we could probably have
I know we could.
an episode on it itself. Not about me, but
Yeah.
about that
We
process
need to.
of
So we
retirement.
need to have that conversation, yeah.
We put out an offer in service that anybody after what would consider to be a traditional career length, something over 25 years, but doesn't mean you can't come and see me less than that. But if you automatically get asked if you want to come and have a cup of tea. So it's not an exit interview or anything like that. It's I think some people do it and some people don't do it. But what it is for me is an opportunity to reflect with somebody on their career. And it's an opportunity for me to make sure that they've got things in place, that it's not going to be a cliff edge. And sadly, it has been a detrimental cliff edge to some people, really
Definitely.
significant, with some really sad tales to tell, because we are. Sometimes we are what we do, aren't we? We talk about
So
ourselves.
indoctrinated and conditioned. There's a great one. There's a podcast by Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee, and he talks about. He was on with Dr. Gabon Mate, and they were talking about first responders and doctors not taking all of their annual leave because we have a feeling that we need to be there. I need to be there. The people need me. I have a responsibility and a role. And you know what? If Justin exploded tomorrow, touch wood he doesn't, the fire service would still carry on. It would be absolutely fine. The only people that will recognise that you stayed late every weekend and didn't come home in the evenings are your family and your children. You know what I mean? You've got to get that balance of you're more than just what you do.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, say I've made those sacrifices sometimes disproportionately. I've flown back from holidays, not because I needed to or contractual or something like that, but because I felt I needed to be there. I think one of the things I've done is I've spoken to a lot of people about how do I manage the transition for me personally, but more importantly, how do I manage the transition for the organisation? There's a lot of people that will say, I've got to give 3 months' notice. Here's my 3 months' notice, and I'm off at this level. And actually, if you're talking about an organisation that's got £77 million revenue, it's got a 400 400k capital programme, a £400 million capital programme. It's got so many things that are on train that you don't want to upset. It's got a vibrant workforce. It's got lots of good things about it, and it's got lots of things that you're working on to make it better. That you want to make sure transitions effectively, and so that has to be planned. I've taken some advice on that and on how I do it. But on a personal level, it's trying to work out where I can continue to add value. The things that aren't about what somebody else could pay you to do, but more about what are the things that are really aligned with your values that you'd say, I'd like to be involved in that because I think I might have something to offer.
Colossal amounts, not just you, but so many people leaving the sector. If we don't find ways for them to continue to contribute.
Yeah. Well, you're right. All sorts of levels. So we've done things where people can come retire, but then come back as a Green Book instructor with us.
Yeah. Why not?
Or come into fire safety with us, because that knowledge level that they've built up, those skills and experience, but also it helps them transition. So some people might say, well, actually, it's a bit my safety net that I'm going to come and work for you at your training centre for the next, it's not a right. This is something you'd apply for, and it has to fit with us and our needs. But we get the benefit. The individual gets the benefit, but they also get a transition. And so some people have done that for, maybe they've done that for a year, and then they felt comfortable to entirely go from something that they've been, part of the fabric of for 30 plus years in many cases. But
I think it's a really good cost-effective way to be creative with our part-time contracts. Certainly in places like training school, community safety, water and risk, there's lots of value people can add. Mentorship, trauma and support. There's a lot if we just be a little bit more creative. And I'm not saying we're not. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great work. I'm not going to answer to anything.
It's about trying to put those flexible routes in. But it's not just flexible routes for people that are in the organisation. It's also outside the organisation. It's also flexible routes for people that are inside the organisation.
Yes.
How do you go from a fire prevention person to a fire protection person? How do we skill and equip you and provide the gateways? How can you say, well, I'm not interested in promotion, but I am interested in fire safety. But if I get into fire safety, can I become a fire engineer? And so actually I can create the pathway. I've got to put all the right safeguards in place, the right parameters that says actually if you decide all of a sudden you want to go operational again, you can't.
You're going to invest in us, we're going to invest in you.
Yeah, and that might mean you have to drop back down and then work your way back up a different pathway.
Yeah.
But, all these things are the things we try to put in place. But I think in closing, I will look for opportunities to still be engaged. I've become a visiting professor at a university.
Yeah.
I think that will give me an opportunity to continue to be engaged in something that I think is just going to be really good.
Yeah.
Got really good potential.
Mate, for us, it's a constant open door. I mean, obviously we have Carl on every now and again to just talk about things in the sector. I'd love once every 6 months or whatever it looks like, or never again, whatever feels most appropriate for you, depending on your experience today and how you found the whole thing and all that sort of jazz. Because I think there's a lot to be said. People might argue, well, that person hasn't got skin in the game anymore. It's easier for them. We wouldn't engage with people that haven't got an emotional and, most people that have been in it this long, very few leave it in a bitter way and go, I don't care if it explodes tomorrow. Most people want to see it continue to flourish and eventually see the efforts and fruits of their work flourish into some long-term change.
Yeah,
I really loved our conversation, mate.
But just in a different way.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to practice what we preach when we spoke about balance and go and spend some time with my loved ones as we approach the evening. But thank you so much for your time, mate. Please send my love to all of your loved ones, and I really hope to be able to catch up again soon.
Yeah, and I hope things work out for you. And I haven't been through that. I know it's a particularly challenging time.
I have to practice a lot of daily gratitude, but also, like we said before, I have to right-size some of my stuff. I haven't got terminal illness. My children are safe and well, and they haven't got any big disabilities. And we just reach on support. And total transparency, you've been very supportive of me. You've shared some personal things back and forth. You have no professional obligation to me whatsoever. And that's just, I'll say that as an insight for people, that there's a lot of very good people out there that are willing to support and help through no other means than they think it's the right thing to do. So I'll publicly put it out there and just thank you for that. And I know it will continue, so I appreciate it.
All right. So, Kevin.
Beautiful, mate. Stay safe. Speak to you soon.